The interrogation chamber feels colder than the void of space. I sit here, my forearms shackled to this metal chair, staring at the recording device that will capture my words. They want to know what happened during the Third Galactic War. They want to understand how the mighty Zephyrian Empire, rulers of 17 star systems, fell to a species that had barely left their home planet when we first encountered them. My name is Kethvar, former battle commander of the 47th Assault Fleet. I have fought in 43 campaigns across the galaxy, conquered 12 worlds, and led my troops to victory against the Crystalline Horde and the Machine Collective. I was considered one of the finest military minds of my generation. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for war against the humans. The first reports came from our scouts in the Outer Rim territories. A new species had been discovered on a blue-green world they called Earth. Initial surveys suggested they were primitive, barely capable of crude space travel. Their technology seemed laughable compared to ours. We had plasma weapons that could melt through starship hulls, while they still used projectile weapons that fired small metal slugs. Our shields could deflect energy beams from capital ships, while their largest weapons barely produced the power output of a personal sidearm. The High Command was amused. Here was a species that might provide decent slave labor once properly broken. Their world was rich in resources, particularly in rare minerals our empire needed for expansion. The decision was made to incorporate them into our territory through standard conquest protocols. It should have been simple. It should have been over in days. I remember the briefing clearly. Intelligence reported that humans had no unified government, constantly fighting among themselves in petty conflicts. They had dozens of different languages, cultures, and belief systems that kept them divided. Their military forces were scattered across hundreds of different organizations. Classic signs of a species ripe for conquest. We had seen it countless times before. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. 3 battle fleets would approach their system from different vectors. The first wave would destroy their space-based infrastructure and any military vessels they might have. The second wave would establish orbital bombardment positions around their major population centers. The third wave would deploy ground forces to secure strategic locations and begin the subjugation process, standard procedure that had worked flawlessly for centuries. I was assigned to lead the ground assault on their largest continent. My forces numbered 50,000 elite Zephyrian shock troopers, supported by atmospheric fighters, hover tanks, and orbital fire support. Intelligence suggested we would face no more than primitive projectile weapons and basic explosive devices. Our powered armor could easily deflect such attacks, and our energy weapons would make short work of any defensive positions. The journey to their system took 6 standard cycles. During that time, I studied their species extensively. Humans appeared physically weak compared to most spacefaring races. They stood on only 2 legs, had no natural armor or claws, and seemed to rely entirely on tools and weapons for survival. Their individual strength was pathetic compared to a Zephyrian warrior. Their reaction times were slower, their senses more limited, and their lifespans remarkably brief. Yet something about them troubled me. The more I read their intercepted communications and studied their history, the more unsettled I became. These creatures had spent their entire existence fighting. Not just occasionally, but constantly. Their entire recorded history was one long chronicle of warfare, from small tribal conflicts to massive global wars involving millions of combatants. What struck me most was not just that they fought, but how they fought. Other species we had conquered typically engaged in warfare for resources, territory, or survival. Humans seemed to fight for concepts, for ideas that existed only in their minds. They would die for abstract notions like freedom, honor, or revenge. They would sacrifice themselves for others with no expectation of reward. It was behavior that defied logic. Their capacity for violence was staggering. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet multiple times over, yet somehow managed not to use them in their final conflicts. The restraint this required was almost as frightening as the weapons themselves. What kind of species creates the means of their own extinction, then chooses not to use it? But it was their adaptation that truly worried me. Every conflict in their history showed the same pattern. Humans would enter a war with one set of tactics and technologies, then rapidly evolve new methods when the old ones failed. They learned from every defeat, improved after every loss, and came back stronger each time. Species that defeated humans in early battles often found themselves overwhelmed by completely different tactics in later engagements. As our fleets entered their solar system, I tried to dismiss these concerns. History and tactics meant nothing against superior technology and overwhelming force. Our ships were faster, our weapons more powerful, our armor stronger. We had conquered species far more advanced than these primitives. Whatever tricks they might have learned fighting among themselves would be useless against a real military force. The first sign that something was wrong came when our lead scouts failed to report back. Then long-range sensors detected movement throughout their system. Ships were launching from their planet, from orbital stations, from asteroids and moons we thought were uninhabited. Hundreds of ships all moving to intercept our forces. But these were not the crude vessels our intelligence had described. These ships moved with precision and purpose, using formation tactics that spoke of careful planning and coordination. As we closed to engagement range, our sensors revealed weapons emplacements and shield generators that should not have existed. Their technology had advanced dramatically in the few cycles since our last intelligence update. The battle for their system was supposed to last hours. Instead, it raged for 18 cycles. Every time we adapted to their tactics, they changed their approach. When we targeted their larger vessels, they switched to smaller, faster ships that swarmed our formations. When we adjusted our targeting systems for the smaller craft, they deployed weapons that disabled our sensors. When we compensated for the sensor jamming, they attacked with methods we had never encountered before. The humans learned faster than any species we had ever faced. They seemed to understand our technology almost as quickly as we deployed it, finding weaknesses and exploits we did not even know existed. Worse, they shared this knowledge instantly across their entire force. Defeat one human ship, and within minutes every other human ship had learned from that engagement. By the time I reached their planet's surface with my ground forces, I already knew this would not be the simple conquest we had planned. My dropships descended through their atmosphere under heavy fire. Human aircraft swarmed around us like angry insects, firing those primitive projectile weapons that should not have been able to penetrate our shields. Yet somehow they were scoring hits. Later analysis would reveal they had modified their ammunition with materials harvested from our own crashed vessels, turning our advanced alloys against us. The landing zones we had selected were supposed to be lightly defended agricultural areas, far from major population centers. Intelligence had assured us these regions would offer minimal resistance, allowing us to establish secure beachheads before advancing on strategic targets. Instead, we found ourselves descending into carefully prepared kill zones. The humans had abandoned the concept of static defensive lines. Traditional military doctrine suggested they should have concentrated their forces around important cities and industrial centers. Instead, they had dispersed throughout the countryside in small mobile units that struck without warning and vanished before we could respond. Every farmer seemed to be a soldier, every vehicle a potential weapons platform, every building a possible ambush site. Our first major engagement occurred near what their maps labeled as a small town, with barely 3,000 inhabitants. My tactical computers indicated this should be secured within hours with minimal casualties. What we found instead was a hornet's nest of interconnected defensive positions that had been prepared for cycles. Every building had been turned into a fortress with underground tunnels connecting them in a vast network we could not map from orbit. The humans had studied our tactics extensively. They knew our standard assault procedures, our formation patterns, even our communication protocols. When my first wave advanced according to standard doctrine, they were met with concentrated fire from directions our planning had deemed impossible. The humans had positioned weapons in locations that violated every principle of defensive warfare we understood, yet somehow made tactical sense. What unnerved me most was their coordination. These were not professional soldiers following orders from a central command. These were civilians who had taken up arms to defend their homes. Yet they fought with a precision and unity that would have impressed veteran troops from any army in the galaxy. Farmers coordinated with shopkeepers, teachers worked alongside mechanics, all functioning as a single organism dedicated to our destruction. Their weapons technology had evolved dramatically since our initial surveys. Those primitive projectile weapons had been enhanced with targeting systems that rivaled our own. Their explosives had been upgraded with compounds that could penetrate our armor. Most disturbing of all, they had somehow acquired energy weapons clearly based on our own designs, but modified in ways that made them more effective against Zephyrian forces. The fighting for that first town lasted 4 cycles. 4 cycles to capture 3,000 humans who should have surrendered within hours. When we finally secured the area, we discovered that most of the defenders had escaped through evacuation tunnels we never detected. We had won a tactical victory that felt like a strategic defeat. Reports from other landing zones were equally disturbing. The humans had prepared defensive positions throughout their planet, with a thoroughness that spoke of years of planning. They had studied every aspect of our previous conquests, learning from the defeats of other species to develop countermeasures we had never encountered. Every mistake we had made in previous campaigns had been catalogued, analyzed, and turned into a weapon against us. But it was their adaptability that truly terrified me. During our second major assault, the humans demonstrated tactics that completely violated their own military doctrine from cycles before. They had abandoned fixed positions in favor of fluid defensive networks that shifted constantly. When we adjusted our approach to counter these new tactics, they immediately evolved again, implementing strategies that seemed impossible for such a primitive species to conceive. Their use of terrain was masterful. Humans seemed to understand their world in ways that went beyond simple geography. They used weather patterns as weapons, turning storms and seasonal changes into tactical advantages. They employed their planet's wildlife as intelligence assets, training native animals to detect our movements and relay information. They even manipulated their own ecosystem, using controlled fires and flooding to channel our advances into carefully prepared ambush sites. The psychological impact on my troops was severe. Zephyrian warriors are trained to face any enemy with confidence born of technological and physical superiority. We expect to overwhelm lesser species through sheer force and advanced weaponry. But the humans had somehow negated our advantages while amplifying their own strengths. My soldiers began reporting disturbing encounters. Humans who should have died from wounds that would kill any other species, continuing to fight with injuries that defied medical understanding. Human forces that appeared to communicate without any detectable transmissions, coordinating attacks across vast distances with impossible precision. Human weapons that seemed to malfunction deliberately, only to explode when Zephyrian troops attempted to examine them. The humans also demonstrated a disturbing disregard for their own lives that went far beyond simple courage. They would sacrifice themselves without hesitation to accomplish tactical objectives. Entire units would throw themselves into hopeless attacks not to achieve victory, but simply to gather intelligence about our capabilities that they would somehow transmit to other forces before dying. Their medical technology, primitive as it appeared, produced results that challenged everything we understood about battlefield medicine. Humans who should have been incapacitated by wounds that would hospitalize a Zephyrian warrior would return to combat within days. They had developed techniques for treating injuries under combat conditions that allowed them to maintain fighting strength despite casualty, rates that should have broken any military force. Most disturbing of all was their manufacturing capacity. Intelligence had indicated that humans possessed only basic industrial capabilities. Yet during our campaign, they somehow managed to produce weapons, ammunition, and equipment at rates that seemed physically impossible. Every factory we destroyed was somehow replaced by 3 smaller facilities, hidden in locations we could not detect from orbit. The humans had transformed their entire planet into a weapons factory. Civilian facilities that should have been producing consumer goods were instead manufacturing military equipment. Schools had become training centers. Hospitals had become research facilities for developing new countermeasures against our forces. Their entire society had reorganized itself around the singular goal of our destruction. After 20 cycles of ground combat, my forces had secured less than 5% of their primary continent. Casualties among my troops exceeded 70%. With most losses occurring not in major battles but in countless small engagements against opponents who struck without warning and vanished before we could respond. The humans had turned their entire world into a maze of death that consumed our forces piece by piece. Command demanded explanations I could not provide. How could a primitive species inflict such casualties on elite Zephyrian troops? How could they coordinate resistance across an entire planet without communications we could intercept? How could they continue fighting effectively despite losing every major engagement? The answer, I began to realize, lay not in their technology or tactics, but in something fundamental about human nature that we had completely failed to understand. The turning point came during what we called the 72-hour war. Intelligence had identified a major human command center hidden in their northern mountains. The facility appeared to be coordinating resistance activities across 3 continents. High Command ordered its immediate destruction, viewing this as an opportunity to cripple human defensive capabilities with a single decisive strike. I assembled the largest assault force I could manage with my depleted resources. 8,000 elite troops supported by air cover and orbital bombardment. The target was a fortified complex built into a mountain range that should have offered no strategic advantage. Our analysis suggested the humans had chosen the location poorly, positioning their command center in terrain that favored our hover vehicles and made their escape routes limited. The assault began at dawn on the 34th cycle of our campaign. Our preliminary bombardment should have reduced any defensive installations to rubble. Our sensors showed successful target elimination across the entire complex. When my troops began their advance, they expected to find scattered survivors hiding in damaged bunkers, ready for quick elimination and capture of valuable intelligence assets. Instead, they walked into the most sophisticated trap I have ever encountered. The humans had somehow predicted our exact approach routes, timing, and tactics. The bombardment we thought had destroyed their positions had actually triggered carefully prepared camouflage systems that concealed intact defensive networks throughout the mountain complex. We had not destroyed their command center. We had announced our presence and delivered ourselves into a carefully prepared killing ground. The first indication of disaster came when our advanced scouts simply vanished. No distress signals, no weapons fire, no indication of what had happened to them. One moment they were reporting normal progress through abandoned positions. The next moment they were gone from our communications network entirely. When we sent search teams to investigate, they discovered no trace of the missing troops. It was as if they had never existed. Our main assault force entered the complex according to standard urban warfare protocols. The humans allowed us to penetrate deep into their facility before revealing the true scope of their preparations. Every corridor had been turned into a death trap. Every room contained hidden firing positions. Every surface concealed weapons that activated automatically when triggered by our presence. But this was not random violence or desperate resistance. This was precision warfare conducted with a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded anything in Zephyrian military doctrine. The humans had studied our assault patterns so thoroughly that they could predict our movements better than we could ourselves. They knew exactly where each unit would position itself, which routes we would choose, even how individual soldiers would react to specific threats. The fighting lasted exactly 72 hours, as if the humans had planned the duration of the engagement down to the precise minute. During that time, they demonstrated capabilities that redefined my understanding of warfare itself. They used sound as a weapon, creating acoustic frequencies that disrupted our communication equipment and disoriented our troops. They employed light in ways that turned our own enhanced vision systems against us, creating optical illusions that made us attack empty positions while they struck from directions we thought were secure. Their knowledge of Zephyrian physiology was disturbingly complete. They deployed chemical agents specifically designed to affect our respiratory systems, drugs that targeted our unique nervous structure, even psychological warfare techniques that exploited behavioral patterns specific to our species. They knew how we thought, how we reacted under stress, how our command structure functioned. It was as if they had been studying us for centuries instead of cycles. Most horrifying was their use of captured Zephyrian equipment. The humans had somehow reverse-engineered our technology with impossible speed, then improved upon it in ways that violated known physical laws. Our own weapons were turned against us but modified to be more effective against Zephyrian forces than their original designs. They were using our advantages against us while negating our defensive capabilities. The human defenders never revealed themselves directly. We fought shadows and echoes, facing an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Our soldiers reported engaging human forces, only to discover they had been firing at holographic projections, while the real enemies attacked from completely different positions. We learned to distrust our own senses, knowing that human deception technology could make us perceive threats that did not exist, while missing real dangers until it was too late. When the 72 hours ended, I found myself in command of barely 300 survivors from my original 8,000-strong assault force. We had captured the command center but discovered it contained nothing of value. The entire facility was a fake. an elaborate trap designed solely to destroy as many Zephyrian troops as possible, while gathering intelligence about our capabilities. The real human command centers, we learned later, were mobile units that never stayed in one location for more than a few hours. While we had been destroying an empty mountain complex, human commanders had been coordinating global resistance operations from vehicles that moved constantly throughout their transportation networks. We had been fighting a war against an enemy whose leadership structure was impossible to target because it never stopped moving. But the strategic implications went far beyond simple military tactics. The humans had demonstrated something that challenged every assumption about warfare we had developed over millennia of conquest. They had shown that superior technology and overwhelming force could be defeated by sufficient intelligence, preparation, and willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. More disturbing was their long-term planning capability. Evidence suggested the humans had been preparing for our invasion for years before we even knew they existed. They had somehow anticipated contact with hostile alien forces and developed countermeasures in advance. Their entire civilization had been reorganized around the assumption that they would eventually face an enemy exactly like us. Reports from our intelligence divisions revealed that human resistance networks had been established on every continent and every major city, even in locations we had not yet approached. They had created redundant command structures, hidden supply depots, and backup communication systems that functioned even when their primary networks were destroyed. Their preparation was so thorough that eliminating any single element had no impact on their overall capabilities. The psychological profile we had developed of humanity was completely wrong. We had assumed they were a fractured species, divided by their cultural differences and unable to coordinate large-scale operations. Instead, we discovered that their diversity was actually a strength that made them more adaptable and resilient than any unified species we had encountered. When threatened by external forces, humans could put aside their differences and function as a single organism dedicated to survival. Their various cultures and belief systems contributed different perspectives and capabilities that created a synergistic effect more powerful than the sum of its parts. We had expected to exploit their divisions and instead found ourselves facing the most unified resistance in galactic history. By the 40th cycle of our campaign, it became clear that we were not conquering humanity. Humanity was learning to fight us more effectively than we were learning to fight them. Every engagement made them stronger while weakening our position. We were facing an enemy that grew more dangerous the longer the conflict continued. The humans began their counteroffensive during the 43rd cycle, but it took us several days to realize what was happening. Their attacks were so unlike traditional warfare that we initially dismissed them as desperate harassment, rather than coordinated military operations. We expected massive frontal assaults or conventional strategic strikes. Instead, humanity implemented something far more terrifying. They started with infrastructure warfare, but not in any way we understood. Rather than destroying our supply lines, they corrupted them. Human infiltrators had somehow gained access to our logistics networks and began introducing subtle modifications to our equipment and supplies. Weapons would malfunction at critical moments. Armor would fail under stresses it should have easily withstood. Vehicles would suffer cascade failures that seemed random but always occurred. At the worst possible times, our technical specialists initially attributed these problems to the harsh planetary environment or simple wear from extended combat operations. It took weeks before we realized the failures were too precisely timed to be coincidental. The humans were not just sabotaging our equipment. They were programming it to betray us when we needed it most. Their cyber warfare capabilities exceeded anything in our databases. Human computer specialists had somehow infiltrated our most secure networks using techniques that our best analysts could not even identify, let alone counter. They planted viruses that lay dormant for cycles before activating to disrupt critical systems. They inserted false information into our intelligence reports, leading entire units into carefully prepared ambushes. Most disturbing of all, they gained access to our personal communications, allowing them to monitor our troop movements and strategic planning in real time. But their greatest achievement was psychological warfare conducted on a scale that redefined the concept entirely. The humans had studied Zephyrian psychology with scientific precision, identifying specific fears and behavioral triggers unique to our species. They used this knowledge to create targeted propaganda that undermined the morale and fighting effectiveness of individual soldiers and entire units. Human broadcasts began, appearing on our communication networks despite every effort to block them. These were not crude appeals to surrender or threats of violence. Instead, they were sophisticated psychological operations that exploited the deepest fears of Zephyrian culture. They played recordings of our homeworlds under attack, showed fabricated evidence of our families being threatened, even created false news reports suggesting our empire had abandoned us to die on this hostile world. The humans somehow knew details about individual soldiers that should have been impossible to obtain. They would broadcast personal messages mentioning specific names, family members, and private concerns that could only have come from intensive surveillance or infiltration of our most secure databases. Troops began to believe that human intelligence networks had penetrated every aspect of Zephyrian society, making resistance seem futile. Their understanding of our military hierarchy allowed them to conduct targeted assassination campaigns that crippled our command structure without direct confrontation. Human agents would identify key officers and eliminate them using methods that appeared to be accidents or equipment failures. Command positions that should have been absolutely secure were compromised by operatives, who seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish without trace. The replacement officers promoted to fill these positions found themselves inheriting compromised units whose loyalty and effectiveness had been systematically undermined. Orders were questioned, intelligence reports were doubted, and coordination between units began to break down as trust eroded throughout our forces. The humans had weaponized paranoia itself, turning our own suspicions against us. Most terrifying was their ability to turn our strengths into weaknesses. Our superior technology became a liability when they could corrupt it remotely. Our advanced communications made us vulnerable to interception and deception. Our disciplined military structure became predictable, allowing them to anticipate our responses and prepare countermeasures in advance. The humans demonstrated that they had been studying not just our current forces, but our entire military history. They knew how Zephyrian armies had conquered other worlds, what tactics had been successful, and what patterns we would likely follow. This knowledge allowed them to prepare specific countermeasures for strategies we had not yet implemented. Staying several moves ahead of our planning process, their resource management was impossibly efficient. Despite being under constant attack, human industrial capacity seemed to increase rather than decrease as the war continued. They had developed decentralized manufacturing systems that could produce military equipment using civilian infrastructure. Every home became a potential weapons factory, every school a training facility, every hospital a research center for developing new ways to kill Zephyrian invaders. The humans also displayed a disturbing ability to learn from their own deaths. When human forces were defeated, other units would somehow acquire detailed knowledge of what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar failures. It was as if each human casualty provided intelligence that made the rest of their forces more effective. They were learning from defeat faster than we could achieve victories. Their medical technology produced results that violated our understanding of biological limitations. Human soldiers who should have died from injuries that would kill any Zephyrian were returned to combat effectiveness within days. They had developed treatment protocols that allowed them to maintain fighting strength, despite casualty rates that should have destroyed any military organization. Some troops seemed to recover from wounds that should have been fatal, returning to battle with capabilities that exceeded their original performance. By the 50th cycle, our invasion force had been reduced to isolated strongholds that were constantly under attack. Supply ships from orbit could no longer reach the surface due to human aerospace defenses that had somehow achieved technological parity with our own. We were fighting a defensive war on a planet we had come to conquer, surrounded by enemies who seemed to multiply rather than diminish despite our successes. The humans began implementing what they called total war protocols. This was not simply military resistance, but the transformation of their entire civilization into a weapon designed specifically to destroy us. Every aspect of human society had been reorganized around the single goal of making our presence on their world unsustainable. They poisoned the very ground we walked on, using biological agents that made the environment toxic to Zephyrian physiology while remaining harmless to humans. They contaminated water supplies with chemicals that would kill our troops but had no effect on their own population. They even modified their planet's atmosphere in localized areas, creating conditions that would slowly suffocate us while allowing humans to function normally. The humans had turned their entire world into a biological weapon aimed at our species. Every breath we took, every step we made, every resource we tried to exploit had been transformed into a potential method of our destruction. We were not conquering their planet. We were being consumed by it, one soldier at a time. Reports from our orbital forces indicated that human space capabilities had advanced dramatically during the ground campaign. Ships that had been primitive when we arrived were now matching our own vessels in combat effectiveness. Worse, they had begun deploying weapons based on technologies we did not recognize, suggesting they had made breakthrough discoveries during wartime that exceeded their previous scientific achievements by centuries. The realization was becoming inescapable. We were not just losing this war, we were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that grew stronger with every engagement. The humans were not defending themselves. They were hunting us. The final phase of our disaster began when the humans stopped simply defending their world and started hunting our forces across their entire planet. What had begun as localized resistance evolved into coordinated hunter-killer operations that systematically eliminated every Zephyrian presence on their world. They had learned our capabilities so thoroughly that they could predict our responses before we made them. Human strike teams began appearing behind our lines with impossible frequency. These were not random raids or desperate attacks, but precisely planned operations that targeted specific objectives with surgical precision. They would strike at ammunition depots, communication centers, and command posts with detailed knowledge of our security protocols and defensive arrangements. Most disturbing, they seemed to know exactly when and where each target would be most vulnerable. Their intelligence network had become so comprehensive that we suspected they could monitor every Zephyrian on their planet in real time. Orders given in secure facilities would be anticipated by human forces before our own troops received them. Classified strategic plans would be countered by human preparations that could only have been made with advance knowledge of our intentions. The humans had also developed what they called adaptive warfare techniques that made our tactical doctrine completely obsolete. Every time we adjusted our strategies to counter their methods, they would immediately develop new approaches that exploited the weaknesses in our new tactics. It was as if they could think through the strategic implications of any change faster than our command staff could implement it. Their use of captured Zephyrian prisoners revealed a sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple interrogation. Humans had developed techniques for extracting information that did not rely on physical coercion or obvious mental pressure. Instead, they used subtle methods that made prisoners want to cooperate, creating artificial loyalty to human causes that overrode original allegiance to the Zephyrian Empire. Some captured soldiers were returned to our lines as part of prisoner exchanges, only to reveal later that they had been psychologically compromised during captivity. These individuals would function normally for days or weeks before activating pre-programmed behaviors that sabotaged critical operations. The humans had turned our own personnel into weapons against us, using methods so subtle that our medical scans could not detect the conditioning. The biological warfare campaigns intensified as human scientists developed increasingly sophisticated methods for targeting Zephyrian physiology. They created diseases specifically engineered to affect our species while leaving humans completely unharmed. These pathogens would spread through our ranks slowly, causing gradual degradation of combat effectiveness before revealing their true nature through sudden cascade failures of multiple organ systems. Human understanding of Zephyrian biology had become more detailed than our own medical knowledge. They knew vulnerabilities in our physiology that our scientists had never identified, weaknesses that could be exploited through environmental modifications, dietary contamination, or exposure to specific frequency ranges of electromagnetic radiation. They had weaponized the very science of life itself against us. Their manufacturing capabilities had evolved to produce equipment specifically designed to counter Zephyrian technology. Every weapon they built incorporated countermeasures against our armor. Every defensive system included methods for defeating our sensors. Every communication device could intercept and decode our supposedly secure transmissions. They were not just matching our technology. They were surpassing it with designs optimized specifically for fighting us, the humans, demonstrated an ability to reverse engineer captured Zephyrian equipment with impossible speed and then improve upon it in ways that exceeded the original specifications. Weapons we had developed over decades of research were analyzed, understood, and enhanced by human engineers within days. They seemed to understand the principles behind our technology better than the scientists who had originally created it. Most terrifying was their development of weapons based on scientific principles we had never discovered. The humans were making breakthrough discoveries in the middle of a war, advancing their civilization by centuries in the span of cycles. They deployed energy weapons using unknown physics, defensive shields that operated on principles our scientists could not identify, and propulsion systems that violated accepted laws of space-time manipulation. Our orbital support became increasingly ineffective as human aerospace defenses evolved to match and then exceed our capabilities. Ships that had easily dominated their space at the beginning of the campaign found themselves facing human craft that could outmaneuver, outshoot, and outthink our most experienced pilots. The humans had learned to fight in space faster than species that had been star-traveling for millennia. Human boarding parties began attacking our ships directly, using captured transport craft to reach vessels that should have been completely secure in orbit. These assault teams fought with a ferocity that defied description, using tactics that seemed designed to maximize terror rather than simply achieve tactical objectives. They would systematically eliminate crew members in ways that left survivors psychologically traumatized and unable to function. Effectively, the humans had somehow developed portable weapons capable of penetrating starship hulls from the inside, allowing small teams to destroy vessels that would normally require capital ship armaments to damage. They turned our own ships into weapons against the rest of the fleet, using captured vessels to attack other Zephyrian craft with detailed knowledge of design vulnerabilities and tactical weaknesses. Communication with our home systems became increasingly sporadic as human forces gained control of local space. The messages that did reach us painted a disturbing picture of a species that had somehow extended their influence far beyond their single world. Human diplomatic missions had made contact with other alien civilizations, forming alliances and sharing anti-Zephyrian intelligence with remarkable speed. Reports suggested that human knowledge of our technology and tactics was being distributed to potential enemies throughout the galaxy. Species that had been subjects of the Zephyrian Empire for centuries were beginning to revolt using techniques obviously learned from human military advisors. The humans were not just defending themselves, they were actively working to destroy our entire civilization. By the 60th cycle, my remaining forces numbered fewer than 2,000 soldiers scattered across a dozen isolated strongholds. These positions were under constant attack by human forces that seemed to know exactly how to exploit every weakness in our defensive arrangements. We were not fighting a war. We were dying slowly, while an entire species learned to hunt us with scientific precision. The final realization was that humanity represented something completely unprecedented in galactic history. They were not simply another species to be conquered or negotiated with. They were an existential threat to every other form of intelligent life, a civilization whose very existence challenged the fundamental assumptions about how advanced societies develop and interact. The humans had demonstrated that technological superiority could be overcome by sufficient intelligence, adaptability, and ruthless determination to survive. They had shown that unity could be achieved without uniformity, that diversity could be transformed into strength rather than weakness. Most terrifying of all, they had proven that a species could advance centuries in the span of cycles when facing sufficient pressure. We had not invaded a primitive world. We had attacked a species that would either join the galactic community as equals or destroy it entirely in the process of defending themselves. There was no middle ground with humanity. The evacuation order came during the 68th cycle, transmitted from high command through heavily encrypted channels that the humans had somehow failed to compromise. The message was brief and carried the authority of the Emperor himself. All Zephyrian forces were to withdraw from the human system immediately. The Third Galactic War was over and we had lost, but even our retreat became another lesson in human capabilities. They did not simply allow us to leave. They managed our withdrawal with the same precision they had applied to every other aspect of the conflict. Human forces coordinated their attacks to funnel our evacuation efforts into specific corridors while maintaining pressure that prevented any delay or reorganization of our forces. The humans had somehow calculated exactly how many ships we would need for evacuation, how long the process would take, and what routes we would be forced to use. They positioned their forces to ensure maximum casualties during our withdrawal, while preventing any possibility of regrouping for a counterattack. They turned our retreat into a final demonstration of their tactical superiority. During those last days, I witnessed something that will haunt me forever. The humans offered to treat our wounded, not as a gesture of mercy or a propaganda victory, but as a practical demonstration of their medical capabilities. They wanted us to see exactly how advanced their healing techniques had become, how thoroughly they understood Zephyrian physiology, and how completely they could control the biological processes that sustained our lives. Their field hospitals were more advanced than our primary medical facilities. Human medics could treat injuries that would have required major surgery aboard our ships using portable equipment that seemed to operate on principles our doctors could not comprehend. They demonstrated medical techniques that could heal damaged organs, regenerate destroyed tissue, and even reverse what we considered permanent neurological damage. The message was clear. They could save us if they chose to, just as easily as they could kill us. Our lives were entirely at their discretion, dependent on their continued willingness to show restraint. They had achieved complete dominance not just militarily but biologically. They had become the masters of life and death for our entire species. When I finally reached my evacuation ship, I discovered that nearly 70% of my original invasion force was dead, missing or too badly injured to continue serving. The survivors carried psychological wounds that would never heal, traumatic memories of facing an enemy that had redefined the very concept of warfare. Many would never be able to function as soldiers again, broken by encounters with human capabilities that challenged their understanding of reality itself. But the physical casualties were only the beginning of our losses. The humans had systematically captured or destroyed our most advanced equipment, reverse-engineered our most closely guarded technologies, and gained access to classified information that compromised our strategic capabilities throughout the galaxy. They now possessed detailed knowledge of Zephyrian military doctrine, weapon systems, and tactical procedures that had taken centuries to develop. Worse, they had demonstrated techniques and technologies that exceeded our own capabilities in fundamental ways. Human innovations developed during the conflict represented scientific advances that our civilization might never achieve. They had leapfrogged centuries of research and development in the span of cycles, driven by the pressure of warfare to discover principles that our peaceful research programs had failed to uncover. The intelligence reports compiled during our retreat painted a terrifying picture of human potential. Their population had actually increased during our invasion, with accelerated breeding programs and enhanced medical care, producing more humans faster than we could eliminate them. Their industrial capacity had expanded dramatically, with new manufacturing techniques allowing them to produce military equipment at rates that defied conventional economic theory. Human educational systems had been revolutionized to produce scientists, engineers, and military strategists with capabilities that exceeded anything in our databases. Children who had been in primary education when our invasion began were graduating as technical specialists, whose knowledge rivaled our most advanced experts. They had compressed normal developmental timelines through teaching methods that seemed to download information directly into human consciousness. Their space program had advanced from primitive orbital flights to interstellar capability within the span of our campaign. Human ships were now patrolling their system with technology that matched our own fleet capabilities. Most disturbing, intelligence suggested they were already planning expeditionary missions to other star systems, preparing to spread their influence beyond their homeworld. As our ships fled their system, human vessels followed at a respectful distance, not to attack but to observe. They documented our withdrawal procedures, analyzed our ship designs, and gathered intelligence about our navigation systems and faster-than-light capabilities. They were learning from our retreat, just as they had learned from every other aspect of our interaction. The humans transmitted a final message to our departing fleet. It was not a threat or a demand for surrender, but a simple statement of fact. They now knew where we came from, how we traveled between stars, and what other worlds comprised the Zephyrian Empire. They had gained the capability to find us anywhere in the galaxy, and they wanted us to know it. They also transmitted detailed records of our invasion, complete documentation of every battle, every tactical decision, Every strategic error we had made during the campaign, they had compiled a comprehensive analysis of Zephyrian military capabilities and weaknesses that they announced their intention to share with any species interested in defending themselves against future Zephyrian expansion. The psychological impact of this gesture was devastating to our remaining forces. The humans had not simply defeated us. They had studied us like laboratory specimens, cataloging our behaviors and reactions with scientific precision. They had treated our invasion as an educational opportunity, a chance to learn everything about Zephyrian civilization and capabilities while testing their own adaptive potential. Reports from our intelligence networks throughout the galaxy confirmed our worst fears. Human diplomatic missions had already made contact with dozens of other species, offering technological assistance and military alliance in exchange for mutual defense agreements. They were building a coalition specifically designed to contain Zephyrian expansion while establishing themselves as the dominant military power in our region of space. The humans had also begun transmitting what they called educational materials throughout known space. These were detailed analyses of Zephyrian technology, tactics, and vulnerabilities, freely shared with any civilization willing to receive them. They were deliberately undermining our military advantages by giving potential enemies the knowledge necessary to defeat us. Most terrifying was their announcement of a new policy toward aggressive alien civilizations. Humanity would no longer wait for attacks before responding to potential threats. They had decided to actively hunt down and eliminate any species that demonstrated hostile intentions toward other civilizations. They had appointed themselves the guardians of galactic peace, with the demonstrated capability to enforce their will upon any opposition. As we retreated toward our home systems, we carried with us the knowledge that humanity represented an existential threat to the Zephyrian Empire and possibly to every other aggressive species in the galaxy. They had proven that technological superiority could be overcome by sufficient intelligence and adaptability. They had shown that unity could be achieved without sacrificing diversity. That strength could be multiplied rather than diluted by cooperation. The humans had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that could learn faster than others could adapt, evolve faster than others could develop countermeasures, and grow stronger under pressure that would destroy other civilizations. They represented the emergence of a new kind of intelligence, one that thrived on challenge and became more dangerous the more difficult the obstacles it faced. We had awakened something that should have remained dormant. The journey back to our home systems took 12 cycles. 12 cycles of carrying the weight of absolute defeat and the knowledge of what humanity had become. During that time, reports reached us from throughout the galaxy that confirmed our worst fears. The humans had not simply defeated one invasion force. They had fundamentally altered the balance of power in known space. Human expeditionary fleets had begun appearing in systems throughout our former sphere of influence. These were not invasion forces, but what they called diplomatic missions, backed by military capabilities that exceeded anything in our databases. They offered alliance and protection to species that had been subjects of the Zephyrian Empire for centuries, providing them with technology and knowledge necessary to achieve independence from our control. The speed of human expansion was unprecedented in galactic history. Within cycles of our defeat, they had established outposts in dozens of star systems, created supply lines spanning thousands of light years, and begun construction of installations that dwarfed anything in our empire. They had somehow solved the fundamental logistics problems that limited the expansion rate of every other spacefaring civilization. Their diplomacy was as sophisticated as their warfare. Human negotiators understood alien psychology with the same precision they had applied to military tactics. They offered exactly what each species needed most while asking for just enough in return to create mutual dependence without resentment. They built alliances that were stronger than conquest because they were based on genuine benefit rather than forced submission. The humans had also begun what they called cultural exchange programs with their new allies. These were educational initiatives that shared human knowledge and techniques while learning about alien capabilities and perspectives. But the exchanges were not balanced. Humans learned faster, understood deeper, and applied knowledge more effectively than any species they encountered. Every alien civilization that worked with humanity emerged from the relationship stronger than before. but also fundamentally changed. Human influence was subtle but pervasive, introducing concepts and technologies that revolutionized entire societies. They were reshaping the galaxy not through conquest but through improvement, making every ally more capable while ensuring their own continued dominance through superior adaptability. Reports from our intelligence networks revealed that human technology continued to advance at rates that violated every known model of scientific development. They had somehow weaponized the process of discovery itself, using war and diplomacy as tools for accelerating research and innovation. Every challenge made them smarter. Every enemy taught them new capabilities. Every alliance provided access to knowledge that enhanced their own achievements. The humans had solved problems that had challenged our greatest minds for centuries, often developing multiple solutions simultaneously and choosing the most effective approach for each specific situation. Their research methods seemed to compress normal scientific timelines through techniques that our analysts could not understand or replicate. Most disturbing were reports of human colonies being established in systems we had considered uninhabitable. They had developed terraforming technologies that could transform hostile environments into thriving worlds within cycles rather than millennia. They were not limited to conquering existing habitable planets. They were creating new ones wherever they chose to expand. Human population growth had accelerated beyond biological norms through medical advances that extended lifespans while increasing birth rates. They had somehow overcome the demographic limitations that constrained the expansion of other civilizations, creating a growing pool of increasingly capable individuals who could support continued exploration and development. When we finally reached our home system, we discovered that human diplomatic missions had arrived before us. They had somehow traveled faster than our military vessels, using propulsion technologies that exceeded our own capabilities. They were waiting for us with offers of peace, cooperation, and what they termed mutual understanding. The human ambassador was surprisingly diplomatic, expressing regret for the casualties our forces had suffered, while making it clear that further aggression would be met with responses that would make our previous defeat seem merciful. They offered to share medical technologies that could heal our wounded veterans, provide economic assistance for rebuilding our damaged military infrastructure, even establish cultural exchange programs that would benefit both civilizations. But the underlying message was unmistakable. Humanity now possessed the capability to destroy the Zephyrian Empire whenever they chose to do so. Our continued existence depended entirely on their willingness to show restraint and their evaluation of our potential for peaceful coexistence. We had become a subject species without formally surrendering, dependent on human mercy for our survival. The peace negotiations revealed the full scope of human planning capabilities. They had somehow anticipated every possible Zephyrian response to defeat, prepared countermeasures for strategies we had not yet conceived, and developed contingency plans that addressed scenarios our own strategic planners had never considered. They were thinking further ahead than we could follow, operating on timescales that encompassed not just immediate concerns but long-term galactic development. The treaty they offered was remarkably generous, allowing the Zephyrian Empire to maintain internal autonomy while accepting human oversight of our external relationships. We would be permitted to continue governing our existing territories as long as we abandoned all aggressive expansion and agreed to mediation of conflicts with other species. In exchange, they offered technological assistance, economic cooperation, and protection against external threats. The alternative to acceptance was not explicitly stated, but clearly understood. Complete destruction of our civilization through methods we could not counter or even comprehend. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that could eliminate our species entirely while leaving our worlds intact for colonization by more cooperative civilizations. The Emperor accepted their terms because no other choice existed. The Zephyrian Empire, which had dominated 17 star systems and conquered dozens of species, had become a vassal state of a civilization that had achieved faster-than-light travel only cycles before our invasion began. We had been defeated not by superior force but by superior intelligence applied with ruthless efficiency. As I conclude this confession, I am forced to acknowledge truths that challenge everything our civilization believed about strength, progress, and survival in the galaxy. Humanity represents something completely unprecedented, a species that treats challenges as opportunities, enemies as teachers, and setbacks as preparation for greater achievements. They have demonstrated that technological advancement is not the primary determinant of military success, that unity can be achieved without uniformity, and that intelligence properly applied can overcome any material disadvantage. They have shown that a species can evolve centuries in the span of cycles when facing sufficient pressure and motivation. Most importantly, they have proven that cooperation can be more powerful than conquest, that building alliances creates more sustainable power than forcing submission, and that understanding enemies completely is more effective than simply defeating them militarily. The humans have become the dominant force in our region of the galaxy not because they were the strongest when they began, but because they learned to become stronger, faster than anyone else could adapt to their growth. They represent the emergence of a new kind of civilization, one that thrives on challenge and becomes more dangerous the more difficult the obstacles it faces. We thought we were invading a primitive world. Instead, we had awakened something that will reshape the entire galaxy, according to principles we never imagined possible. The humans have not simply survived our attack, they have used it as a catalyst to transform themselves into the most formidable force in known space. They are no longer the species we encountered when our invasion began. They have become something far more dangerous. Teachers who learn by fighting, diplomats who negotiate from overwhelming strength, and guardians who protect by eliminating threats before they can mature. The galaxy will never be the same because humanity has entered it not as conquerors but as gardeners, reshaping everything they touch while ensuring their own continued growth through adaptation that exceeds every other species' ability to compete. We should have left them alone.